Welcome back to Movies Recapped. The movie starts in 1984 when Flight JL-50 is taking off from Kolkata. However, halfway through the flight, they start experiencing heavy turbulence and bad weather. Suddenly the communications are cut off and the plane is lost without a trace. From that day on, not a single clue is found regarding the disappearance. The movie then cuts to 35 years later in the year 2019. We are shown a remote village in West Bengal named Alava where a bunch of kids are playing football. Suddenly, a large plane flies over them, which is very rare in a hilly area like theirs. The group immediately rushes in the direction of the plane and finds out that it has crashed into the nearby hills. The scene then shifts to Calcutta City where the protagonist SH is watching a news report on TV. The report mentions that a commercial airplane flight AO-26, which had several high-profile people on board, has gone missing. It is suspected that the plane has been hijacked a while later. SH Tanu heads to his workplace, the Central Bureau of Investigation. It turns out that he is a high-ranking officer there. He then goes to the crash site with his colleague Garga and starts his investigation. At first, he approaches a rescue soldier and inquires about their progress. The soldier reveals that all but 2 people died in the crash and the survivors are receiving medical attention. One of the survivors is the pilot, and the other one is a passenger. The strange thing is that a passenger's corpse is found in the cockpit, indicating that the plane was hijacked before it crashed. After the conversation, the 3 prepared aboard a helicopter to visit the crash site, but just then, the soldier remembers something very important. He tells the CBI officers that the crashed plane is not the one they're looking for. In simple words, it is not Flight AO-20. It is in fact Flight JL-50 that disappeared 35 years ago. The movie then flashes to the past, to the year 1984, and we are introduced to an aspiring pilot from Colonel Katabi who she has everything one could ask for: a high-paying job, a loving family, and a bright future. However, for some reason she is upset from the past few months. Her mother tells her to brighten up and forget the past, but Bihu simply ignores her and leaves. Back in the present, Bihu's fighting for her life in the hospital. She is none other than the pilot of the crashed flight JL-50, which went missing in 1984. Meanwhile, SH and Guga travel to another remote village and visit a school there. They summon the physics professor, Dr. Subrato Das, and start interrogating him. Shani reveals that the crashed plane JL-50 had departed for its destination in 1984 and disappeared without a trace. He also tells the old man that one of the seats in the flight was vacant and the ticket belonged to none other than Dosim. For a brief moment, Dos is visibly stunned as this is some Final Destination shit, but he claims that he doesn't remember about the past as he has become old now. Dr. Dos then heads home and starts searching for something. A few moments later, he collects a bunch of documents, some pictures, and burns them all together. This implies that he knows something about the plane crash later. A news report reveals that a terrorist organization named the ABA has claimed responsibility for Flight AO-26's hijacking and is demanding the release of their leader, Paro Majumdar, in exchange for the passengers' safety. Paro is scheduled to be executed in a few days. It is also reported that the officials will surrender to their demands a few days later. Pilot Bihu regains consciousness and Sanu heads over to interrogate her. First and foremost, he asks her how the plane crashed and Bihu starts narrating everything. She reveals that like any other day, the flight took off at 3 p.m. For the first 10 minutes, everything was fine, but suddenly a passenger barged into the cockpit and stabbed the co-pilot to death. The in-flight meals must have been terrible. He then gave Bihu some coordinates and threatened her to alter the plane's route, but before she could comply, the weather deteriorated all of a. This caused the plane to go through an intense session of turbulence and soon it crashed. After the story, Centeno asks Bihu the location and date of the flight's takeoff and the latter replies Kolkata 1984 as expected. Shani doesn't believe her words and calls her a liar. He then mentions that they're in 2019 and hearing this Bihu is taken aback to find out more about her. The CBI officers reach Bihu's old house and interrogate some of the neighbors nearby since the incident happened 35 years. Not many people know her, but fortunately they come across a couple who were close to B, Hu's family. The husband reveals that Hu was a skilled pilot, but her career started going downhill. When she got into a relationship with a man, he made her pregnant before marriage and passed away mysteriously. However, Hu's breaking point came when her child was born dead. Soon the husband takes out a photo album and shows a picture of Hu right before she was killed in 1984. Lo and behold, she looks exactly like the Hu in the hospital despite the evidence. Sanu, who doesn't believe in time travel, still thinks that everything is fabricated later. He heads back to the CBI base and listens to the black box recording of JL-50. As Hu had mentioned previously, some hijackers entered the cockpit and killed the co-pilot. Then after a while, everything went silent. So Antonio asks his technician the last date the black box recorded anything, and the latter mentions August 23, 1980. This comes as a surprise to everyone as a black box is virtually indestructible. Hence, they adamantly have to believe that the plane has somehow traveled through time to the year 2019. Meanwhile, the second survivor from the JL-50 flight crash, Mira, has regained consciousness when a nurse informs him that the crash has another survivor. Mira immediately heads to Hu's room to finish her. Luckily, a nurse notices him and calls for help. However, instead of surrendering, the lunatic Mira holds the nurse at knife point and emerges in the hospital's hallway. Santon also arrives at the same time and tries to calm Mira down, but the latter doesn't listen. Instead, he slowly approaches the main door, and when everyone is expecting it the least, he escapes. Santon runs after the lunatic, but by the time he reaches downstairs, Mira has already escaped in a suspicious. Tanny then conducts research on him. He finds out that Mira was a genius who was a professor at the Kolkata Science Research Center. He was also a left-wing activist who was involved with some terrorist organizations. 35 years ago, after finding Mira's address, Tanny reaches his home there. He finds a huge collection of books, files and other research papers that Mira had written in his. Sanu opens one of the files and comes across a research paper named Project A. When he flips over some pages, he also finds the blueprint of the JL-50 flight, realizing that it is related to the plane crash. He decides to take the file with him later in order to find out more about Metra and his project. As Sanu goes to the Kolkata Science Research Center and talks to a professor named Ashwini. As soon as Ashwini hears about the project, he starts giving a history lesson. He mentions that in 253 BC the Emperor of India gathered scholars, scientists, and philosophers from all around the country who produced 9 different books, which taught about several supernatural arts, like invisibility, the ability to fly and time travel. These books were then buried into the ground. Hearing that the enemies might use it for their personal use. Several millennia later, some pages of the time travel book were found and a team of researchers was put together to prove the theory. This top-secret research program was labeled Project A, but no conclusion ever came from it. After hearing this story, Sanu inquires about Mira, but Ashwini mentions that he doesn't know much about him. Instead, he suggests Sanu meet Dr. Dose, claiming that the two were very close back then. At night, an enraged Sanu barges into Dose's house and confronts him for lying earlier. He then brings out the Project A papers and tells Dose to reveal everything, left with no choice. The old man starts speaking. He says that Myra's father was Project A, but when they couldn't find any conclusion, the government pulled the plug on it. Years later, Myra continued his father's research, and after working day and night, he finally found the code. Once again, Sanja doesn't believe in the story and calls it BS, but Dose tells him that everything is true. He continues by saying that Myra, using his genius mind, researched the incomplete Project A papers and found the formula, with the help of which he discovered some wormholes in the Earth's atmosphere. Through these wormholes, time travel is possible. Dose further mentions that he was Myra's disciple at the time, so he knew the entire plan. Myra wanted to hijack a plane, fly it through the wormhole and reach another timeline. For this, he formed an alliance with Parto Majur, who is the terrorist leader that caused plane AO-26 to be hijacked in the present time. At last, Dose concludes by saying that he didn't board the flight because he became scared. He sensed that the experiment would go wrong, and so it did. Mira had hoped to return back with the flight in 35 hours, but his calculations turned out to be wrong, and the plane vanished for 35 years. Getting math wrong in that way makes no sense. Surprisingly, even after all this explanation, Tanny refuses to believe a word, but Doss reminds him that the officials have finally agreed to release the terrorist leader Paro from custody in 2 days. If he and Metra reunite, they can use their knowledge and power to cause some serious damage to the country. I don't know though. Omeras seems like in. This time Sano appears to be concerned. So Doss tells him that there is a way to stop Mira. He proposes that they enter the wormhole and go back in time to 1984 where they can stop Jail 50 from being hijacked. If they succeed, there will be no deaths and criminals like Paro and organizations like ABA will never exist, although still hesitant. San Antonio. Agree. In the following scene, the duo heads to meet Bihu at the hospital as she is the only one who knows the coordinates to the wormhole. Santin requests her for the information, but Bihu? Who is still shocked that she has traveled 35 years into the future, doesn't want to comply so easily. After a lot of convincing, she agrees, but only if she is permitted to fly the plane. Santin clearly doesn't want to give in to her demands, but since this is a top-secret mission and since she is the only pilot, he has no choice but to agree. The next morning, Garana arranges an airplane secretly, and the trio sets off on their mission. Santin still thinks that everything's a joke, but is there about to reach the supposed wormhole. Everything starts shaking suddenly, the plane malfunctions and Bihu is forced to make an emergency landing in an open field. The area seems completely different from the one they just. Soon a vintage car arrives and the three ask for a lift and get in. After a while, they reach Cold Kata City and San finally realizes that they have actually arrived in 1984. The streets, buses, hotels, and the people, everything resembles the 80s. Although Santin was taken aback by the weird situation, he decides to finish off what they came for, but at first he wants to grow a mustache. I mean, he wants to get something off his. At night, he heads to an orphanage, and here it is revealed that Santin is an orphan who has dropped off at the same orphanage in the year 1984. He waits for a while, and suddenly 2 men arrive in a car and drop the baby inside. Santin rushes inside to check if the baby is him from the past and from a locket. He verifies his assumption. I suspended disbelief for the time travel thing, but the coincidence of this timing is absolutely ridiculous. The next morning he joins Dos and Bihu and the three start discussing their next step. Dos, who is a close confidant to Micra in the past, reveals that the secret meeting on the Jail 50 hijacking is going to take place this evening in a warehouse outside town. Later, the group reaches the said place and waits for the perpetrators to. While inside the car, Sanu curiously asks Bihu if she saw her stillborn child with her own eyes, but the latter has no answer for this. Bihu simply says that after the delivery, she became unconscious, and when she woke up the next day, her parents gave her the bad news that her baby was born dead. Meanwhile, Miraparo and other thugs arrive at the warehouse and the meeting commences. Hence the three make a plan. Dos and Santin will be confronting the thugs inside while Bihu will be waiting in the car according to the plan. The two head inside and point their guns at Mira and his men. But just then the goons also strike back, initiating a deadly shootout. Fortunately, Santin uses his superior combat skills and takes down the thugs one by one. In the end, he also takes down Paro. While Dr. Dos kills his former mentor, Me. Now with the mission accomplished, San Antonio grabs the suitcase containing Project Day papers and tries to burn it, but surprisingly Dos holds him at gunpoint and threatens for him to stand back here. It is revealed that everything was Dos' plan all along. Since the original Project Day papers were burnt to ashes in the jail, 5th. The crash, the exact coordinates for the time travel. Wormholes were lost. However, Dos was not ready to give up so easily. So when Sanu approached him for interrogation, an idea struck his mind. He decided to use the CBI officer to travel back in time and steal the papers with the help of which he could gain immortality. What Dos also reveals that the day Mira escaped from the hospital, he arrived at his house, but instead of helping Dos killed him, hence removing a major obstacle from his With this revelation, the two shoot at each other, but Dose comes off of it the worst, allowing Sanu to destroy the papers once and for all. He then proceeds to leave with Bihu, but suddenly all three of them begin experiencing an excruciating, painful sound. It turns out that since Mara and his men were killed, the plane JL-50 never got hijacked, and hence, the three never traveled to the past. Now the timeline is rejecting unwanted anomalies, and hence the three are all teleported to the present. However, a small change in the past results in a completely different and alternate future. In the final scene, Tanny was shown traveling in AO-26 with his wife, and their plane is not hijacked. In fact, both Flight AO-26 and JL-50 were never hijacked. As the villains were killed back in 1984, Shnu and Gargo even run into each other in the plane, but do not recognize each other. This means that the two never became friends in this alternate reality, and probably SH did not even get to join the CBI as an officer. Shnu then arrives at the same orphanage to celebrate his birthday as he's playing with the kids. An old Bihu approaches him and hugs him tightly. In a shocking turn of events, it is revealed that Bihu's son was not born dead after. In fact, the child was dropped to the orphanage by Bihu's father as it was born before Bihu was married, and he feared that the society wouldn't accept her. The child is none other than San himself. However, in the new timeline, after the JL-50 flight returns safely, Bihu's mother eventually told her the truth. And that's how the mother-son duo were reunited. Now in this timeline, the two have never been apart. The movie ends as San and his mother distribute presents to the orphan kids and play with them as both are empathetic, happy, and grateful for their new lives. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.